The room smells like betrayal. Freshly signed papers on the table, a pen dropped, not placed, as if even the act of holding it had become unbearable. Adaeze Okafor-Winters doesn't cry. She learned a long time ago that tears are a currency the powerful collect from the powerless. Instead, she squares her shoulders beneath the silk of her tailored wrap dress, picks up her bag with both hands, steady, deliberate, and walks toward the elevator of the most expensive penthouse she has ever hated. Inside her bag, a single-use phone loaded with one contact, a boarding pass to Abuja, and a photograph she hasn't looked at since the morning the stick turned pink. She doesn't look back. She can't. If she had, she would have watched the most feared man in Seoul crack open like ice under a summer sun, and she would have stayed. She could never afford to stay. Rewind 18 months. A Lagos-born textile designer doesn't walk into elite spaces. She engineers her entrance. That's what Adaeze Okafor-Winters had always done. She built Uli Studio from a single loom and a ruthless eye for color, and she watched it grow into a label that fused Igbo weaving traditions with sharp contemporary silhouettes. When a luxury cultural exchange program flew her to Seoul for a collaboration showcase, she arrived not as a guest, but as an equal. That was the night she met Ryu Seojun. He was standing at the edge of the gallery reception in the way that only men accustomed to owning rooms do, watching everything, touching nothing, dark suit, quieter than he had any right to be, given the rumors that traveled ahead of him like weather warnings. Head of Ryu International, the conglomerate whose legitimate face masked what Seoul's underground knew as the Obsidian Syndicate, he crossed the room. Not because she was the most beautiful woman there, though she was, but because she was the only one not looking at him. He spoke of legacy, of bridges, of a future built in 2 languages. She told him his pitch was overwritten. He laughed. A real laugh, not the rehearsed ones she'd seen him perform for cameras. That was the beginning. They married 11 months later in a ceremony so private it never touched the press. A woman from Enugu and a man whose grandfather had built an empire on silence. Their apartment in Mapugu was a study in contrasts. Her Lagos market prints hung beside his mother's Celadon ceramics. Their love was that same beautiful collision, loud and still, warm and terrifying. She had loved him the way fire loves oxygen, completely, dangerously, without reservation. She didn't know then that she was also burning herself down. The Obsidian Syndicate was not a ghost story. Adaeze found this out on a Tuesday evening when she came home early from a charity dinner, a migraine, she told her table mates, and descended into the private parking level to find her husband standing beneath the fluorescent lights in a white shirt painted crimson, 2 men on the concrete, conscious but barely. His second in command, a sharp-eyed man named Baek Junho, was issuing orders into an earpiece with the calm of a man filing quarterly reports. Ryu Seojun looked up and saw her. He didn't reach for her. He didn't explain. He simply said her name, quietly, precisely, and she understood in that moment that the man she'd built her life beside was a door she had never actually opened. Later, in the kitchen, blood washed from his hands, he told her the truth in the manner of a surgeon delivering a terminal diagnosis. You are extraordinary, Adaeze. You are also the single most exploitable thing in my world. My enemies have already noticed you. I will not let them use you against me. She asked him what that meant. He told her it meant the marriage was over. Not because he'd stopped loving her, he was careful not to say that, because he had. And love in his world was a blade turned inward. Adaeze left Seoul with 30 kilograms of luggage, the clothes on her back, and a secret that was approximately the size of a walnut, but growing. The pregnancy was 6 weeks along on the night she boarded the flight. She hadn't told him. She told herself it was because there was no version of that conversation that didn't end in catastrophe. Either he would use it to keep her, or he would use it to destroy her carefully constructed exit. She told herself that for 8 months. Back in Lagos, in the sprawling Okafor family compound in Lekki Phase 1, she rebuilt herself with the stubborn speed of someone who has no other option. Her mother, Mama Chidinma, asked 0 questions and served the first of many pots of ofe onugbu. Her father, a retired judge with a voice like gravel, hired 2 new gatemen without comment. Her brother Kelechi, tech entrepreneur, gym devotee, self-appointed human shield, barely left her side. Uli Studio grew. A new flagship location opened in 6. International press started calling. She named the baby Emeka Chisomo in her heart before she named him anything on paper. Emeka, God has done great things. A prayer and a provocation both. His kicks were not gentle, they were declarative. Unmistakably, his father's son. She never looked directly at the ultrasound, not once. Because in that small gray image was a face she didn't yet have the courage to love fully, because loving him fully meant grieving everything else. The contractions began on a Thursday evening, not a warning shot, a full declaration of war from her own body, rolling relentless waves that turned her breath into short, controlled gasps. Her auntie Ngozi, a retired obstetrics nurse with the clinical calm of someone who had caught hundreds of lives as they fell into the world, pressed both palms to Adaeze's belly and nodded once. "This one is ready," she said. "He is tired of waiting." In the chaos of coats and go bags and Mama Chidinma's prayers filling the corridor, none of them noticed the phone. It glowed twice inside Adaeze's bag, a number she didn't recognize, a South Korean country code she would have recognized anywhere. The call died, went to voicemail, lost in the rush to the hospital. On the other side of the world, in a glass and concrete command suite above the Gangnam skyline, a man in an immaculate charcoal suit listened to the international ringtone cut to silence. He set the phone down on the desk with the precision of someone setting a chess piece. Then he stood and walked to the window. His expression told the room nothing. His posture told Baek Junho everything. 8 months of deliberate reinvention had turned Ryu Seojun into something that even his enemies struggled to name. He was sharper, more absolute. The Obsidian Syndicate had never been more precisely controlled. Its rivals silent, its territories expanded, its enemies managed with a cold efficiency that had become legend in certain circles. He had also never been more hollow. The penthouse had been stripped of anything that carried her frequency. He had been meticulous about it. The Lagos market prints, the mismatched mugs she'd insisted were artisanal, the small potted croton plant she'd named Gerald and watered every Sunday. Gerald died in week 3. Seojun hadn't watered him. Junho entered the office that morning, the way he always entered, without noise, without wasted motion, with a tablet and an expression calibrated to deliver information without editorializing. "Weekly update from the Lagos contacts," he said. "There is an anomaly." Seojun didn't turn from the window. "Speak." "Activity at a private maternity facility near the Okafor family compound last night confirmed." A pause. "Illness?" "No, sir." Junho's voice carried the particular neutrality of a man carefully not inflecting. "Maternity ward, mother and infant, both reported stable. A boy, 3.8 kilograms. The room didn't change. The city outside continued its noise. The lights continued their cold blinking. Ryu Seojun stood completely still for 11 seconds. Then he turned. Something had shifted in his face, not an expression exactly, but the absence of the mask. Underneath it was a man who had just been handed a detonator and had not yet decided whether to press it. "Timeline," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. The temperature in the room dropped 2 degrees. Junho met his eyes. "The timing is consistent." The unspoken math hung between them like smoke. Seojun moved to the floor-to-ceiling window. Below him, Seoul blazed and hummed. For 8 months he had told himself that sending her away had been the only act of love he had left to give her. He understood now, with the particular clarity of a man who has miscalculated catastrophically, that he had not protected her. He had simply lost everything twice. "Cancel the week," he said. "Prepare the aircraft. We leave for Lagos within the hour." Junho nodded once. He had already begun. The postnatal ward at the Lekki private clinic was warm with low light, and the soft percussion of newborn sounds. Adaeze sat propped against 3 pillows, her son asleep in the clear-sided bassinet at her elbow. She was studying him with the focused intensity of someone memorizing something irreplaceable. The exact slope of his nose, the improbable thickness of his lashes, the particular way his fists curled even in sleep, as if already prepared to fight for something. She had been watching him for 4 hours straight. She didn't notice the change in corridor energy until it was already in the doorway. 2 men in dark suits, the posture of people trained to take up space without apology, and between them, a man she had spent 8 months trying to surgically excise from her memory. Ryu Seojun looked like what he was, a contained, dangerous thing that had walked into the wrong room and was making no apologies for it. His eyes moved across the space the way they always had, quickly, completely, settling finally on her face with a weight that made her chest tighten. Then his gaze dropped to the bassinet. He went completely still. Adaeze's arms moved before her brain issued the order, both hands gripping the bassinet, pulling it toward her body, her torso curving instinctively around it. Kalichi was on his feet from the chair in the corner before the motion finished. His frame filled the space between the bed and the doorway, like a wall that had decided to be annoyed. "You need to turn around," he said, his Lagos accent gone smooth and deliberate. "Whatever you think gives you the right to be in this room, you don't have it. You signed that away." Seojun didn't look at him. He looked at Adaeze. "You were pregnant," he said. Not a question, an indictment delivered in a whisper. "Yes," she said. Her voice did not tremble. She had spent 8 months building a version of herself that did not tremble for him. "I was. You didn't tell me. You told me I was a liability." She held his gaze. "You told me my existence put targets on both of us. Did you think I would hand you a reason to label someone else the same?" Something moved behind his eyes. A flinch, buried but there. He looked again at the baby. And Adaeze watched the mask slip just for a second. The calculated steel of him replaced by something unguarded and devastating. Auntie Ngozi rose from the corner. She walked to the bassinet. She looked at the infant. She looked at the man in the doorway with a forensic eye. "Let him see," she said to Adaeze. Not warmly, firmly. "A child is not a battlefield. Let him look at what he helped create before you decide what happens next." Adaeze pressed her lips together. The war between her instincts raged for a full 10 seconds. Then she nodded. Seojun crossed the room slowly, not the walk of a man accustomed to being careful, but the walk of a man actively choosing to be. He stopped beside the bassinet. He looked down at his son for a long time. Emeka Chisomo, 8 hours old, opened one eye, yawned enormously, and then, with a reflex born before intention, flung one small hand outward. It found Seojun's finger, gripped it. The sound Ryu Seojun made was not a word. It was something smaller and more honest than anything he had said in a long time. When he looked up at Adaeze, she had already looked away, because she had promised herself for the last 8 months that she would not let his grief become her problem. She was finding that promise harder to keep than she'd planned. He didn't come to the Okafor compound with an army. He came with a folder. Seated in the open-air sitting room, surrounded by the controlled skepticism of the Okafor family and the distant sound of Mama Chidinma's pot making her opinions known from the kitchen, Ryu Seojun was precisely as uncomfortable as a man should be when he has arrived somewhere he lost the right to be welcomed. He spoke first to Adaeze. "I'm not here to take anything," he said, his voice careful, precise. "I'm here because I have a son I didn't know existed until 36 hours ago, and because whatever I did to earn your silence, I earned it. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm asking for the chance to become something worth less contempt." Her father, Obina, a man whose silences were famously heavier than other men's speeches, leaned forward. "What specifically are you asking?" Seojun opened the folder. Inside, a Swiss-held irrevocable trust for Emeka Chisomo structured to mature at 25, a 49% equity stake in Ryu International's newly formed West African textile import division, majority control retained by the Okafor family, an independent security upgrade for both the compound and Yuli Studios' flagship location, contracted through a firm with no direct links to his operations. These are not payments, he said, reading the room correctly. They are obligations I have toward a child who didn't choose any of this. He placed the last document on the table. His eyes moved to Adaeze. 1 month, an apartment nearby. I come when you allow it, where you allow it. No lawyers, no pressure, no conditions attached to any of this, regardless of what you decide. I simply want Emeka to know the sound of my voice before it becomes strange to him. The room erupted. Kelechi's objections were architectural in their construction. Mama Chidinma's expressions from the kitchen doorway communicated entire paragraphs without words. That night, Adaeze sat in her old bedroom with Emeka nursing slowly and her mother beside her on the bed. He is dangerous, Mama Chidinma said. I know his world is violent. Adaeze looked at her son, but I watched him hold Emeka's finger and come apart at the seams. That was real, and if I refuse him access now, from a position of anger, he becomes a legal opponent. If I give him this month with terms I control, he becomes a father, learning to earn his place. I would rather have him learning than litigating. Her mother was quiet. Then, you are too strategic for your age. I learned from you. The next morning, Adaeze met him in the courtyard. 1 month, she said, her voice clear, laced with warning. My terms, my schedule. You don't arrive without notice. You don't overstep with my family. You don't bring the syndicate into this compound in any form. If at the end of 30 days I decide this isn't working, you respect that, and we discuss legal arrangements like adults. He looked at her for a moment. Then he lowered his head in a slow, deliberate bow. On my life, he said. She had not expected that. She filed it away and walked back inside. The Lagos son was doing something to Ryu Seojun that no intelligence report had anticipated. He arrived each morning at the time she specified, not a minute early. He brought things that were useful rather than expensive, an imported baby monitor with medical-grade sensitivity, organic cotton, swaddling cloths, and, on one occasion that became the source of a week's worth of Okafor family commentary, a hand-carved Yoruba rattle he had spent an entire afternoon searching for in Balogan Market, sunburned and uncertain, Baek Junho keeping respectful distance 3 stalls behind. Auntie Ngozi taught him to hold Emeka's head correctly, to test formula temperature on his wrist, to change a nappy with something approaching competence. The first attempt had been, in Kelechi's words, a diplomatic incident. By the 3rd week, he was efficient. By the end of the month, he was, though no one said this aloud, natural. He ate at the family table. He survived Mama Chidinma's pepper soup, which she made deliberately hot. He asked Obina about his years on the bench and listened with genuine attention. He and Kelechi established a functional truce rooted in mutual respect for security protocols and a shared, though separately expressed, devotion to the baby. One afternoon on the veranda, Emeka asleep in his carrier between them, the air thick with bougainvillea and the promise of rain, Seojun sat watching his son with the particular expression he wore when he thought no one was observing him, unguarded, almost tender. You're different here, Adaeze said. He considered this. Here I have no position to perform. I am not the head of anything. I am just a man attempting to become a decent father before his son is old enough to form opinions. So pause. Seoul has been silent since you left. Not peaceful. Silent. Those are not the same thing. She gathered the question that had been sitting at the back of her throat for 8 months. Why did you actually end it? The real reason, not the speech about weakness. He was quiet for longer than she expected. Then he spoke, his voice low and haunted. 3 weeks before you left, the Oran faction hit my car. Baek Junho was driving a truck. It wasn't a warning. I spent 2 days in hospital, and every hour of it thinking about the fact that you were supposed to be in that car. You canceled the night before. A last-minute change. They didn't know. He finally looked at her. I started seeing your face in the wreckage every night. Not what happened, what almost did. I told myself that if I cut you out completely, if I made myself someone you could hate and leave, you would be unreachable, invisible to them, safe. You decided that alone. Yes. Without telling me. Yes. She looked at the sleeping baby. That was the single most arrogant thing you have ever done. I know. You took my choice from me. I know that too. Before she could answer, his phone lit the table between them. He glanced at it. The warmth left his face between 1 second and the next. Junho's car, he said quietly. 2 blocks east, 3 hours. Nigerian plates. The occupants are not Nigerian. Adaeze looked at her sleeping son. Her stomach turned to stone. The car was a message. Beck Junho and Kalichi, in a partnership that neither of them had planned, and both of them were slightly embarrassed by, confirmed it within 90 minutes. Oran faction scouts, low rank, sent to observe, to photograph, to confirm what their intel suggested, that Ryu Seojun, in the softening warmth of a Lagos family compound, had found his leverage point. That night, Seojun stood on the wide veranda in the dark, entirely himself again, not the careful student of fatherhood the past weeks had revealed, but the man from the garage, precise, controlled, lethal in his stillness. Adaeze found him there. You brought your war to my son, she said. He turned. The anguish on his face was unperformed. My war followed me. I believed 30 days of distance from Seoul would be enough. I was wrong. He stepped toward her, not with aggression, but with urgency. They watched me these past weeks. They saw a boss who changes nappies and eats jollof rice and laughs at his son's expressions. In the language they speak, that is not endearing. That is vulnerability. And vulnerability is an invitation. So you run back to Seoul, she said, flat, anticipated, and we stay here as the thing they use to reach you. No, running is what I did before. It is what built this entire catastrophe. He closed the remaining distance between them, his hands coming to her shoulders. Firm, not restraining, he looked at her in the dark. To dismantle this permanently, I need to go back. Not to retreat, but to finish it, to walk back into that city as what I actually am, with my family visible beside me, and demonstrate in the only terms the Oran faction understands, that touching this family is the last decision they will ever make. And you want us in Seoul. I want you safe. He held her gaze. 1 month in Seoul, in a home I built when I had no reason to hope for this, on your terms, with your exit fully guaranteed. If you stand beside me once, if they see that this is not a weakness, but a dynasty, the calculation changes permanently. And if after that month you look at me and tell me to go, I will spend the rest of my life making sure no shadow of mine reaches your son or you. Adaeze said nothing for a long time. She looked at the garden, at the house behind her, full of people who would stand in front of any threat for her, at the baby monitor clipped to her pocket, its green light steady. 1 month, she heard herself say. Seoul, my terms, then we decide together. The house in Shangbuk-dong was not what she expected. The car wound through forested hillside roads and stopped before traditional wooden gates flanked by stone lanterns. Beyond them, a Hanok-inspired villa, its curved roof lines elegant and unhurried, its courtyard planted with Zelkova trees and wildflowers, its windows warm with interior light. I built it after you left, Seojun said, watching her face. I told myself it was a security asset, a strategic property. A pause. I had a Lagos-based architect consult on the interior. She stepped inside. The main room faced a private garden designed with the geometry of traditional Korean landscape and the color palette of West African textile. The nursery had clean celadon walls stenciled in Adinkra symbols with a hand-stitched mobile of brass beads and hanji paper cranes hanging over the crib. The kitchen smelled of jollof rice. You planned all of this, she said. I hoped, he said. There is a difference. She made no promises, but she let herself walk through every room. And she did not ask to go to a hotel. Seojun carried Emeka through the corridors of Gyeongbokgung Palace, whispering the stories of the kings who had walked the same stones. He had a small hanbok, commissioned, a deep indigo, embroidered at the collar, and the photograph of Emeka wearing it alongside his father, became the image Adaeze stared at on her phone at night with an emotion she hadn't finished naming. He gave her the deed to Yuli's studio outright. He gave her 50% of Ryu International's green energy division, structured so that no transfer or legal action could touch it. Her independence was not dependent on his goodwill. It was contractually severed from it. Your power is yours, he said simply. Not a gift, not a salary, yours. She let herself cry. Finally, in her own bedroom, quietly, for about 12 minutes, then she washed her face and went to make dinner. The black rose appeared at dawn. Placed precisely at the center of the villa's front gate, no note, a single perfectly formed midnight bloom, still cold with night, Oren calling card. Baek Junho confirmed it before 6 a.m. Seojun's face, when he saw it, was a controlled catastrophe. He turned to Junho. End it, he said. Adaeze stepped between them. She was not the woman who had flinched in a parking garage. She had spent the last several months building something from rubble, and she had not done that to watch it get dismantled by someone else's grudge. If you respond with force, you validate everything they believe about your state of mind. You confirm the vulnerability. She held his gaze. Let me show you a different language. The Ryu Global Charity Gala was Seoul's most visible annual event, attended by diplomats and conglomerate chairs and a certain category of shadow world figures who wore their philanthropy like armor. Adaeze arrived on Seojun's arm in a gown that required its own paragraph, a hanbok silhouette in midnight indigo aso oke, her waist defined by a band of hammered brass, her hair built upward into a crown of braided architecture. Emeka, held by a former Special Forces operative, introduced to the room as his nanny, wore the commissioned hanbok and accepted the attention of several dozen strangers with the imperious indifference of a baby who has decided he is important. Seojun introduced them with a simplicity that landed like an announcement. My wife Adaeze Ryu, my son Emeka Chisomo. The resurrection of a woman Seoul society had been told was divorced, the existence of a child no one had known about. The room absorbed it like a stone dropped into still water. The Oren faction's representative, an older man named Yom Gwansik, who wore his contempt with the comfort of something he'd owned for decades, found them during cocktail hour. A beautiful family, he said, the word beautiful operating as an insult in the way only certain men can manage. One hopes you have not grown. Sentimental, Seojun-si. Adaeze turned to face him before Seojun could respond. She smiled. The particular smile of a woman who has decided she is no longer afraid of the thing in front of her. Yomsi, she said, in Korean so precisely accented it drew a visible reaction from the man's own aide. My husband's clarity of purpose has never been sharper. You mistake love for softness. We don't share that confusion. She accepted a glass from a passing tray. To new chapters. She held his eyes until he, publicly, was required to drink. He retreated. The room had watched. The room would talk. Kim Ryu Seojun's Nigerian wife was not leverage against him. She was the sharper edge. They did not remarry, not formally, not yet. What they did, on a Sunday morning in the private garden of the Seongbuk-dong house, with Baek Junho standing awkward, and moved at the edge of the terrace, and the Okafor family assembled on a laptop screen propped against a potted zelk of a tree, was begin again. Adaeze wore ivory, her own design, her own, a dress that was structurally a statement, gathered at the waist in the manner of an aso oke ceremonial wrap, its neckline finished in celadon silk. She had made it in the Yuli Seoul studio at 3 in the morning 2 weeks ago. Seojun wore hanbok in deep blue. He'd had it fitted the same week she made the dress. Neither had told the other. He spoke first because he had earned the right to go first by virtue of having more to answer for. Adaeze, I stood in front of you once before and made vows I believed were about protection. What I understand now is that I was protecting a version of my life that I mistook for my life itself. You are not a liability. You are the person who walked into a Seoul gallery and refused to look at me, and I have never recovered from it, and I no longer intend to. He took her hands. I vow this time not to shield you from my world, but to build a world worth sharing, to be honest before I am strategic, to ask before I decide, to be your equal in every sense of that word, or spend the rest of my life working toward it. She looked at him for a moment before she spoke. Seojun, you are the most frustrating, most complicated, most consequential mistake I have ever made, and I would make you again. I vow to stand beside you, not behind you, to bring everything I have built, my voice, my stubbornness, my 6,000 opinions, into this partnership. To build a Meka, a life in 2 languages and 2 worlds, and let him choose the best of both. She smiled slightly. And to tell you when you are wrong, which will be frequent, and to expect you to listen. Agreed, he said. From the laptop, Kilichi's voice. This is objectively romantic, and I remain suspicious. Emeka, in Auntie Ngozie's arms on the screen, chose this exact moment to sneeze. An enormous whole-body production, and the garden broke into laughter. They exchanged plain silver bands. Simple. Theirs. Later, on the veranda, in the early dark, Seojun's arms around her, the city lights a grammar of movement below them, Adaeze felt, for the first time in a very long time, the particular quiet of a person who has found the place they were looking for. She allowed herself to rest into it. The shadow in the van was not Oren. This was what Baek Joon-ho's best people had spent 6 weeks failing to confirm. The figure, visible in fragments, always at the edge of every security feed, identifiable only by the consistency of a particular hooded jacket and a deliberateness of movement that suggested training, had no known affiliation, no syndicate markings, no criminal record that any cross-reference could surface. What they had were photographs, not of Seojun, of Adaeze, coming out of the Yuli Seoul studio at dusk, buying coffee from the cart near the villa's side gate, playing with Emeka on the interior garden lawn, while Seojun read beside them, apparently safe. Every image was intimate. Every image confirmed the obvious. Whoever held the camera had been inside the security perimeter. Personal, Joon-ho told him. This is not a business grievance. Seojun doubled the guard. Adaeze, who had been shown the photographs and whose response had been quiet and granite hard rather than frightened, refused to stop living her life in any visible way. We cannot let them reduce us to hiding in our own home, she said. Emeka deserves better than afraid parents. He agreed. He also stopped sleeping again, standing on the veranda after the vow ceremony, Seojun's arms around her, the city blinking peacefully below them. Emeka asleep in the nursery behind the monitor's steady green light. Adaeze leaned into his chest and felt him breathe. She was not afraid, not exactly. But she was aware in the specific way you are when something beautiful is also fragile. She would remember this moment later. The lights went out between one breath and the next. Not a flicker, a total erasure. Every interior light, every garden sensor, every exterior security lamp, the monitor's green glow, the city view windows going dark as the smart glass switched modes without input. The backup systems, which had their own independent power draw, did not activate. The silence was different from ordinary silence. It was a prepared silence. From inside, in the nursery, Emeka made a single startled sound. Adaeze moved before Seojun finished saying her name. The fortress has been breached. Not by a rival faction, not by a business enemy, by something far more personal, a threat that has been watching, learning, and waiting for exactly this moment. The night they let their guard down, the night they finally felt safe, every light is out. The security systems are dead, a baby is crying in the dark, and someone is already inside the walls. We know who Adaeze is now. We know who Seojun is. We have watched them cross oceans, build bridges, and choose each other against every reasonable argument otherwise. But the real question, the one this story has been building toward, is not whether they survive the night. It is whether what they have built is strong enough to survive the truth of who is coming for them. You need to be here for what comes next. Subscribe to AfroKorean Chronicles right now. Hit the notification bell. all of it, because when the lights come back on, nothing about this story will be the same. The next chapter drops soon. Don't be the person who finds out from the comments. AfroKorean Chronicles. Stay with us.